The rumble of the approaching train echoed through the sleepy town of Gonzales, Texas. As Willow O'Malley pressed her trembling hands against her swollen belly, the gold band on her finger catching the late afternoon sunlight. 6 months pregnant and dressed in a simple white wedding dress that had been hastily altered to accommodate her condition, she stood on the wooden platform of the depot with hopeful eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the man who had promised to meet her and begin their life together. The year was 1878, and Willow had traveled over 500 miles from her hometown in Missouri after exchanging letters with Herbert Thompson for nearly a year. They had met briefly when he had passed through her town selling farming equipment, and their connection had been immediate. The subsequent correspondence had been passionate, and when she discovered she was carrying his child, he had insisted she come to Texas where they would marry and build a life together. As the train's whistle pierced the air and the massive iron beast slowed to a halt before the station, Willow's heart raced with anticipation. Passengers began to disembark, men in suits and ladies in fine traveling clothes stepping carefully onto the platform. Minutes ticked by as Willow searched each face, looking for the familiar features of Herbert. But as the crowd thinned and the last passenger descended, there was no sign of him. "Excuse me," she asked a station attendant, her voice trembling. "Is there perhaps another train arriving today from San Antonio?" The man shook his head, his expression sympathetic. "No, madam. Next one's not until Thursday." Willow nodded and resumed her post by the edge of the platform, telling herself that Herbert had simply been delayed. Perhaps he'd been held up at his ranch, or maybe there had been a miscommunication about the date. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky and the station emptied of travelers and workers alike, Willow felt the first real tendrils of fear creep into her heart. It was then that she spotted a boy of about 12 years running toward the station, a folded paper clutched in his hand. "Miss O'Malley," he called, looking up at her with curious eyes. "Yes, that's me," she replied, hope surging through her. The boy thrust the letter toward her. "Mr. Thompson asked me to bring you this, said it was important." Willow fumbled with the paper, her fingers suddenly clumsy with dread. As she read the hastily scrawled words, her world collapsed around her. Herbert explained in cold, distant language that he had reconsidered their arrangement. He claimed he wasn't prepared for fatherhood, nor for taking on a wife he barely knew. He apologized for the inconvenience but suggested she return to Missouri on the next available train. The letter fluttered from her fingers to the dusty platform as a sob escaped her throat. Willow sank onto a nearby bench, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. The baby shifted within her, a cruel reminder of her predicament. She was alone, pregnant, nearly penniless, and abandoned in a town where she knew not a soul. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Willow's sobs had subsided to quiet weeping. The station was empty now except for the night attendant who occasionally glanced at her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. She knew she should find lodging for the night, but the thought of moving, of facing this strange town and her new reality, seemed an insurmountable task. The sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks barely registered in her grief-stricken mind. It wasn't until a deep voice spoke that she looked up, hastily wiping her tears. "Evenin', madam. Couldn't help but notice you seemed to be in some distress." Standing before her was a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin. His clothes were trail-worn but neat denim pants, a blue chambray shirt and a brown leather vest. A weathered Stetson sat atop his head, partially shadowing eyes that regarded her with genuine concern. Willow began, but her voice caught on another sob. The man's gaze fell to her wedding dress, then to her swollen belly, and finally to the crumpled letter on the ground. With slow, deliberate movements, he crouched down and picked up the paper, handing it back to her without reading it. "Name's Xander Fitzgerald," he said, his voice gentle as he removed his hat. "Most folks just call me Fitz." Willow took the letter with trembling fingers. "Willow O'Malley," she managed to reply. Well, Miss O'Malley, I don't mean to pry, but it appears to me that you've been left in quite a predicament. A fresh wave of tears threatened to overwhelm her. He was supposed to meet me, we were to be married, but he's changed his mind. I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Xander's jaw tightened as he glanced at the letter in her hand, understanding dawning in his eyes. He looked at her for a long moment, then placed his hat back on his head and straightened his shoulders. "You're not alone," he said firmly, extending a calloused hand toward her. "Not anymore." Willow stared at his outstretched hand, confusion mingling with her despair. "I don't understand. I've got a room at the Gonzales Hotel," he explained. "It's respectable. You can stay there tonight, get some rest, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." "Why would you help me?" Willow asked, suspicion momentarily overriding her distress. "You don't know me." A small smile touched Xander's lips. "My ma raised me to believe that the measure of a man isn't in how he treats those who can do something for him, but in how he helps those who can't do anything for him at all." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I won't lie to you, Miss O'Malley. Gonzales can be a hard place for a woman alone, especially in your condition, but I promise you on my honor that my intentions are nothing but honorable." Willow hesitated, weighing her limited options. The night was growing cold, and she had nowhere else to go. Something in Xander's steady gaze and straightforward manner gave her a sense of security she desperately needed. "Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald," she finally said, accepting his hand and allowing him to help her to her feet. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need for that," he replied, picking up her small carpet bag. "And please call me Xander." As they walked side by side through the darkening streets of Gonzales, Willow could not help but wonder what fate had in store for her in this strange town. Her future, once so clearly mapped out in Herbert's letters, now stretched before her like an uncharted wilderness. But for this moment at least, she was no longer facing it alone. The Gonzales Hotel stood 3 stories tall, its whitewashed facade a stark contrast to the darkening sky. A few gas lamps illuminated the entrance, casting long shadows across the wooden sidewalk. Xander held the door open for Willow, who stepped inside with trepidation. The lobby was modest but clean, with a polished wooden reception desk and several comfortable-looking chairs arranged around a small fireplace. A middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun looked up from behind the desk, her eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight of Willow's wedding dress. "Evening, Mrs. Thornton," Xander greeted her, tipping his hat respectfully. "This is Miss O'Malley. She's had a bit of misfortune and needs a place to stay tonight." Mrs. Thornton's sharp eyes took in Willow's tear-stained face, her wedding dress, and her pregnant state. Her lips pursed slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was kind. "Of course, Mr. Fitzgerald. We have a vacant room on the 2nd floor," she hesitated, glancing between them. "Though I must say Miss O'Malley will be taking that room," Xander interrupted smoothly. "I'll keep mine, we're not. That is to say, I'm merely assisting a lady in need," understanding dawned in Mrs. Thornton's eyes, and she nodded. "I see, very well then." She turned to fetch a key from the rack behind her. "Room 204, Miss O'Malley. It's at the end of the hall, nice and quiet." Willow accepted the key with a grateful nod. "Thank you." "I'll escort you up," Xander said, still holding her carpet bag. "If that's all right with you," Willow nodded, too exhausted to speak. As they climbed the stairs, she was acutely aware of his presence behind her, solid and reassuring. When they reached her door, he handed over her bag and cleared his throat. "I'll come by in the morning, if that's acceptable. We can discuss your situation over breakfast." "That would be fine," Willow replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald Xander." "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." His expression softened. "Get some rest, Miss O'Malley. Things often look brighter in the morning light." With that, he tipped his hat once more and departed, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Inside the small but tidy room, Willow sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling from the day's events. She had arrived in Gonzales full of hope, expecting to begin a new life as Herbert Thompson's wife. Instead, she found herself alone, pregnant, and dependent on the kindness of a stranger. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement of her child within. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. Willow undressed slowly, carefully hanging up her wedding dress, a dress that now seemed to mock her with its promises of happiness and security. She pulled a simple nightgown from her carpet bag and slipped it on before climbing under the covers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind raced with worries about the future. Her savings would not last long, and she had no skills that would enable her to support herself and a child in this unfamiliar town. Returning to Missouri was equally daunting. Her parents had made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with her after learning of her pregnancy out of wedlock. It was well past midnight when Willow finally drifted into an uneasy slumber, tears dampening her pillow. Morning arrived with shafts of sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. For a blissful moment upon waking, Willow forgot her predicament. Then reality crashed back, and she felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her once more. She dressed in a simple blue calico dress, one of the few non-maternity garments she had brought with her that still fit comfortably over her growing belly. After washing her face and tidying her auburn hair, she felt marginally better prepared to face the day. A gentle knock at the door announced Xander's arrival. Willow opened it to find him standing there, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. His hair was dark brown with hints of copper where the sun touched it, and his eyes were a warm hazel. A small scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving his otherwise handsome face a rugged quality. "Good morning, Miss O'Malley," he said, hat in hand. "I trust you slept well as could be expected, thank you," she replied, forcing a small smile. "Mrs. Thornton serves a fine breakfast downstairs. Would you care to join me?" Willow nodded, suddenly aware of her hunger. She had been too distraught to eat the previous evening, and now her body was reminding her that she was eating for two. The dining room was nearly empty at this early hour. They took a table by the window, where sunlight warmed the polished wood surface. A young girl quickly brought them coffee, eggs, bacon, and freshly baked biscuits. After they had eaten in relative silence for a few minutes, Xander set down his fork and looked at her intently. "I hope you don't mind my directness, Miss O'Malley, but I think we need to discuss your plans." "Do you have family you could return to?" Willow shook her head, pushing a piece of egg around her plate. "My parents disowned me when they learned of my condition, and I have no other relatives who would take me in." Xander frowned. "And the father of your child, this Herbert Thompson, you're certain he won't reconsider?" "His letter was quite clear," Willow said, her voice bitter. "He wants nothing to do with me or the baby." "I see." Xander took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "And your funds?" "If you don't mind my asking." Willow hesitated, then decided that honesty was necessary. "I have $23 to my name. The train ticket here nearly depleted my savings." Xander nodded slowly, considering this information. Gonzales is a growing town. "There might be work available, though I imagine few would hire a woman in your condition." He paused, then added carefully, "I have a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's nothing fancy, but there's a cabin that belonged to my foreman before he moved on last month. You'd be welcome to stay there until you've had the baby and figured out what you want to do." Willow stared at him, astonished by the offer. "Mr. Fitzgerald, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly—" "It wouldn't be charity," he interrupted. "The cabin needs cleaning and organizing. My foreman was a good man, but not the tidiest, and I could use someone to cook decent meals. I've been living on my own, cooking for too long, and frankly, I'm tired of beans and bacon." A small smile tugged at Willow's lips despite herself. "Are you offering me employment then?" "I suppose I am," Xander replied with a slight grin. "Room, board, and a small wage in exchange for cooking and keeping the cabin in order, at least until you've had your baby and decided on your next steps." Willow considered the proposal. She had few options, and the idea of having a safe place to stay, especially as her pregnancy progressed, was immensely appealing. Still, she was wary of becoming dependent on a man she barely knew. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't know anything about me." Xander's expression grew serious. "I know you've been dealt a poor hand by a man who should have stood by you. I know you're carrying an innocent life that deserves a chance, and I know what it's like to face the world alone." He hesitated, then added, "My sister found herself in a similar situation years ago. She wasn't as fortunate as you. No one stepped forward to help her when she needed it most." The pain in his voice told Willow all she needed to know. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. "She died in childbirth along with her baby," Xander said, his voice tight. "In a boarding house where no one cared if she lived or died. I was off fighting in the war at the time. By the time I got her letter asking for help, it was too late." Willow reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I'm so sorry." Xander nodded, accepting her sympathy. After a moment, he continued, "So you see, Miss O'Malley, I have my reasons for wanting to help, but I understand if you're hesitant. It's a lot to consider." Willow withdrew her hand and took a deep breath. "I accept your offer, Mr. Fitzgerald, at least for the time being, but I insist on earning my keep." Relief flickered across Xander's face. "Good, that's settled then, and please, it's Xander." "Then you must call me Willow," she replied with a small smile. "Willow," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "It suits you." After breakfast, Xander excused himself to purchase supplies while Willow returned to her room to gather her meager possessions. As she folded her wedding dress and placed it at the bottom of her carpet bag, she felt a curious mixture of sorrow and hope. The future she had planned with Herbert Thompson was gone, but perhaps a different path lay before her, one that, though uncertain, might lead to something better. When she met Xander outside the hotel an hour later, he was waiting with a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat, his hands strong and sure around her waist. The contact was brief, but sent an unexpected warmth through her body. "Ready?" he asked, settling beside her and taking the reins. Willow glanced back at the Gonzales depot, visible in the distance where her dreams had shattered just the day before. Then she turned to face forward toward the unknown road ahead. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." The wagon creaked and groaned as it rolled out of Gonzales, the twin ruts of the road stretching before them like ribbon across the Texas landscape. Willow sat beside Xander, her hands folded in her lap, watching as the town receded behind them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the golden prairie grass that swayed in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," she murmured, taking in the vast expanse of sky and land. In Missouri, her world had been confined to dense forests and rolling hills. This wide open country with its endless horizons was both intimidating and exhilarating. Xander glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Most folks from back east find it too empty at first. Takes time to see the beauty in all this space." "I can see it already," Willow replied. "It feels like freedom." Something flickered in Xander's eyes, approval, perhaps, or understanding. "That's exactly what it is. Freedom to be whoever you want to be, to build whatever life you choose." The words hung between them, laden with meaning for Willow, who had never truly been free to choose her own path. Her life had been dictated first by her parents' strict rules, then by societal expectations, and finally by the desperate need to secure a future for her unborn child. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "How long have you had it?" "5 years now," Xander replied, his voice warming with pride. "Purchased it after the war with what savings I had and a small inheritance from my uncle. It's not the biggest spread in the county, but the land is good. I run about 100 head of cattle and have a small horse breeding operation on the side." "Do you manage it all yourself?" Willow asked, impressed. "I had a foreman, Jake Miller, until last month." "Good man, but his wife wanted to move to California. Can't blame him for choosing her over Texas dirt," Xander chuckled. I've got two hands who help with the cattle brothers named Hector and Miguel Vasquez. They live in town but ride out daily, fine cowboys, loyal as they come. The wagon hit a rut, jostling Willow. Xander's arm shot out instinctively to steady her, his hand warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "Sorry about that," he said, quickly withdrawing his touch once she was settled. "Road gets a bit rough here." "It's all right," Willow assured him, trying to ignore the lingering warmth where his hand had been. "I'm not made of porcelain." Xander's lips quirked upward. "No, I don't suppose you are. Still, we should be more careful with precious cargo." The words were spoken casually, but they caused Willow's cheeks to flush slightly. She turned her gaze back to the landscape, watching a hawk circle lazily in the blue expanse above. "May I ask about the baby's father?" Xander's question was gentle, hesitant. "You don't have to tell me if you'd rather not," Willow sighed, one hand instinctively moving to rest on her belly. "There isn't much to tell. Herbert Thompson was a traveling salesman who passed through our town last year. He was charming, attentive. Everything my parents weren't. We corresponded for months after he left. When I discovered I was with child, I wrote to him in panic. His response seemed like an answer to my prayers, a proposal of marriage and a promise of a new life in Texas." She paused, the pain of betrayal still fresh. "I believed him. I defied my parents and traveled all this way, only to discover that his promises were as empty as this prairie is vast." Xander's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the reins more firmly. "Some men don't deserve the title," he said, his voice hard. "A real man stands by his responsibilities." "I was naive," Willow admitted. "I should have known better than to trust a man I barely knew to believe in promises made from hundreds of miles away." "Trust isn't naivety," Xander countered, "and you're not the first person to be deceived by someone who seemed trustworthy. The fault lies with him, not you." They fell into silence again, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and creaking of the wagon wheels the only sounds. After a while, Xander pointed to a distant smudge on the horizon. "There it is, the Fitzgerald Ranch." As they drew nearer, the smudge resolved itself into a collection of structures nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. A modest but well-built single-story house stood as the centerpiece, its wooden siding painted white, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A large barn, corral, and several smaller outbuildings completed the homestead. A creek wound its way across the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "It's lovely," Willow said sincerely as they crossed a small wooden bridge over the creek. "It's home," Xander replied simply. He guided the wagon past the main house toward a smaller cabin about 100 yards away. The structure was solid with a stone chimney and a small porch of its own. "This will be your place," he said, bringing the wagon to a halt. "As I mentioned, my foreman lived here until recently. It's a bit dusty, but sound." Xander jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Willow descend. His hands encircled her waist, lifting her easily to the ground. For a moment, they stood close enough that Willow could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me show you around." The cabin consisted of a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, with a small bedroom off to one side. A cast iron stove dominated one wall of the main room, opposite a rough-hewn table and two chairs. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, and simple curtains hung at the windows. The bedroom contained a bed with an iron frame, a small chest of drawers, and a washstand. "The privy is out back," Xander explained, pointing through the window to a small structure about 20 paces from the cabin. "And there's a pump for water just outside the door. For bathing, you can heat water on the stove. On Saturdays, if you like, you can use the larger tub in the wash-house behind the main house when the hands aren't around." Willow nodded, taking it all in. The cabin was basic but clean and far more comfortable than she had expected. "It's perfect," she said. "Truly?" Xander looked pleased. I'm glad you think so. I'll bring in your bag and the supplies. There's food enough for a few days, and I picked up some things you might need in town. As he unloaded the wagon, Willow began to explore her new home more thoroughly. The chest of drawers contained clean linens, and a quick inspection of the cupboards revealed basic cooking utensils and dishes. It was a far cry from the life she had expected to lead as Herbert Thompson's wife, but in that moment, it felt like a sanctuary. Xander returned with her carpetbag and several parcels. "I took the liberty of purchasing a few things for you in town," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "Mrs. Thornton at the hotel helped me select appropriate items. There's some fabric for curtains or whatever else you might want to make, thread, needles, women's things." His cheeks reddened slightly. "And some, garments that Mrs. Thornton assured me would be comfortable in your condition." Willow was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." "That was very kind." "Well, I'll leave you to get settled," Xander said, backing toward the door. "I've got chores to tend to. Feel free to rest today. You've had a trying time. Tomorrow is soon enough to begin working if you're feeling up to it." "I'll be fine," Willow assured him. "And I'd like to cook supper for you this evening to begin earning my keep." Xander looked as if he might protest, then nodded. "All right. I usually eat around sundown, nothing fancy, mind you. I'm a simple man with simple tastes." After he left, Willow sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her life. Just 2 days ago, she had been traveling toward what she thought would be wedded bliss. Now she was living in a cabin on a stranger's ranch, preparing to work as his cook and housekeeper. "We'll make the best of it," she whispered to her unborn child, stroking her belly. "Mr. Fitzgerald seems like a good man. We'll be safe here until we figure out what comes next." With renewed determination, Willow unpacked her few possessions and began to clean the cabin, wanting to make it truly her own. As she worked, she found herself humming softly something she hadn't done in months. It wasn't happiness, not exactly, but perhaps it was the first stirring of hope in a heart that had nearly forgotten what hope felt like. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Willow rose early to prepare breakfast for Xander before he headed out to work the ranch. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually transforming the cabin into a cozy home. With the fabric Xander had purchased, she sewed new curtains for the windows and a colorful quilt for the bed. The simple act of creating beauty in her surroundings gave her a sense of purpose and control that she had been missing. Xander, true to his word, treated her with nothing but respect. He took his meals with her in the cabin, their conversations growing easier and more natural with each passing day. Willow learned that he had fought for the Union in the war, returning to Texas afterward despite the lingering tensions. His parents had died of influenza when he was 19, leaving him and his sister alone in the world. The pain of his sister's death still haunted him, evident in the way his voice tightened whenever he spoke of her. In turn, Willow shared stories of her own childhood in Missouri, her love of books, and her dreams of one day becoming a teacher. She spoke of her parents' strict religious upbringing and their unbending beliefs that had led them to cast her out rather than accept her pregnancy. Xander listened without judgment, his quiet support a balm to wounds that were still raw. As her pregnancy advanced, Willow found herself growing more concerned about the impending birth. One evening in late October, nearly a month after her arrival at the ranch, she broached the subject with Xander over supper. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly, "about what will happen when the baby comes. It's only a few months away now." Xander set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "Have you decided what you want to do, whether you'll stay in Gonzales?" Willow shook her head. "I don't know yet, but regardless, I'll need help when the time comes. Is there a doctor in town or a midwife?" "Doctor Parker is a good man," Xander replied. "He serves the whole county, and there's Mrs. Ramirez who's delivered more babies than anyone can count. She lives on the edge of town, near the Mexican Quarter. Would you introduce me to Mrs. Ramirez sometime?" Willow asked. I'd feel better knowing there was someone I could call upon when the time comes. Of course, Xander agreed readily. We can ride into town this Saturday if you're feeling up to it. There are supplies we need anyway. Willow smiled, relieved. Thank you, I'd like that. A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued eating. Xander had praised her cooking enthusiastically, claiming it was the best food he'd had in years. Tonight's meal was simple roast chicken, potatoes, and greens from the small garden behind the cabin, but the satisfaction on his face as he ate was reward enough for her efforts. "This is delicious," he said, helping himself to another serving of potatoes. "You've turned that old stove into a miracle worker," Willow laughed. "Hardly a miracle, just a bit of care and attention." "Well, it's made a world of difference to me," Xander insisted. "Used to dread coming home to my own cooking. Now I find myself hurrying through chores just to get back for meals." The compliment warmed Willow more than it should have. Over the past month, she had found herself increasingly drawn to Xander Fitzgerald. It wasn't just gratitude for his kindness, though there was certainly that. It was the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he inquired after her comfort without being overbearing, the quiet strength he emanated without any need to prove himself. But she reminded herself sternly that such thoughts were dangerous. Her heart had led her astray once before, and the consequences had been devastating. Besides, she was carrying another man's child, hardly an appealing prospect for someone like Xander, who could surely have his pick of unencumbered women in the county. "Penny for your thoughts." Xander's voice broke into her reverie. Willow blushed, grateful he couldn't read her mind. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what I expected it to be." "Different in a bad way?" he asked, his expression concerned. "Different in an unexpected way," she replied carefully. "A month ago, I thought I'd be Herbert Thompson's wife by now, living in whatever home he had prepared. Instead, I'm here in this cabin, cooking for a man I didn't even know existed until the day my world fell apart. Do you regret it?" Xander's question was soft, almost vulnerable. "Coming here, I mean?" Willow looked at him steadily. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "I don't regret it at all. You've been kinder to me than anyone has in a very long time, Xander. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, work when no one else would hire me, and respect when most would have judged me. How could I regret that?" Something shifted in Xander's gaze, a warmth, an intensity that made Willow's breath catch. For a moment, it seemed as if he might say something significant. But then he simply nodded and returned to his meal, the moment passing like a cloud shadow across the prairie. Later that night, after Xander had returned to the main house, Willow sat in the rocking chair by the fire, her hands resting on her growing belly. The baby was active tonight, kicking and turning as if trying to make its presence known. "I know you're there, little one," she whispered. "I haven't forgotten about you. I'm trying to build a good life for us, whatever that might look like." As the fire crackled and the autumn wind whispered around the eaves of the cabin, Willow allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to stay here permanently. To raise her child on this ranch with Xander nearby. The image was so vivid, so achingly desirable that it brought tears to her eyes. But such dreams were foolish, she reminded herself. Xander had offered her shelter and employment out of kindness, and perhaps a desire to atone for not being able to help his sister. That didn't mean he wanted a ready-made family or a woman whose reputation was irreparably damaged. Still, as Willow finally retired to bed, she couldn't quite banish the vision of what might have been of what, in her most secret heart, she wished could be. Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day in Central Texas. Willow dressed with more care than usual, choosing her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair and made her eyes appear more green than brown. The fabric strained a bit across her expanding middle, but overall the effect was still presentable. Xander was waiting for her outside with the wagon, dressed in clean clothes with his hair still damp from washing. He helped her up onto the seat, his touch gentle but firm. "You look nice," he said, the compliment seeming to surprise himself as much as her. "Thank you," Willow replied, smoothing her skirts. "It feels good to dress up a bit for town." The ride to Gonzales was pleasant, the morning sun warming their backs as they traveled. They discussed the changing seasons, the condition of the cattle, and Xander's plans to expand his horse breeding business in the coming year. It was easy, comfortable conversation, the kind that flows naturally between two people who have begun to know each other well. Gonzales was bustling with Saturday activity when they arrived. Farmers and ranchers from the surrounding countryside had come to town to purchase supplies, socialize, and conduct business. The main street was lined with wagons and horses, and the boardwalks were crowded with people. Xander helped Willow down from the wagon and offered his arm. "I thought we might visit Mrs. Ramirez first, then see to our shopping. Does that suit you?" Willow nodded, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. She was acutely aware of the curious glances sent their way as they walked through town. A pregnant woman on the arm of a man who was not her husband was bound to cause speculation, particularly in a small community like Gonzales. "People are staring," she murmured to Xander. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Let them stare. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Mrs. Ramirez lived in a small adobe house on the outskirts of town. The yard was neatly kept, with herbs growing in organized beds and chickens pecking contentedly in a side pen. A gray-haired woman with deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth was hanging laundry on a line when they approached. "Buenos dias, Mrs. Ramirez," Xander called out. The woman turned, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Mr. Fitzgerald, what brings you to my humble home?" Her English was accented but clear. "Mrs. Ramirez, this is Miss Willow O'Malley," Xander introduced them. "She's staying at my ranch and helping with the housekeeping. She's expecting a child in a few months and was hoping to speak with you about what to expect." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Ramirez's dark eyes as she took in Willow's condition. If she had any judgment about an unmarried pregnant woman, she kept it to herself. "Of course, come in," she said, gesturing toward the house. "Mr. Fitzgerald, perhaps you would like to visit with my husband in the workshop while Miss O'Malley and I talk women's business, eh?" Xander looked to Willow, who nodded reassuringly. "I'll be fine. Take your time." Inside the adobe house, it was cool and dim after the brightness of the morning sun. Mrs. Ramirez led Willow to a small sitting room furnished with comfortable chairs and colorful woven blankets. The walls were adorned with religious images and family photographs. Sit, Mrs. Ramirez insisted, easing Willow into a chair. "You must be tired. How many months now?" "About 7, Willow replied, resting her hands on her belly. "The baby is due in late December or early January." Mrs. Ramirez nodded, studying Willow with experienced eyes. "You are healthy, yes." "Eating well, sleeping?" "Yes, very well. Mr. Fitzgerald is generous with provisions, and I've had no troubles beyond the usual discomforts." Good. The older woman sat across from her. "Now, tell me your story, my hija. How does a pretty young woman like you come to be in such a situation, living on a bachelor's ranch and carrying a child with no husband in sight?" The question was direct but not unkind. Willow found herself telling Mrs. Ramirez everything about Herbert Thompson's abandonment, Xander's intervention, and the arrangement they had struck. The older woman listened without interruption, her dark eyes compassionate. When Willow finished, Mrs. Ramirez sighed deeply. "Men can be such fools. This Herbert, he is a coward." "But Mr. Fitzgerald," she smiled, "he is a good man, one of the best in these parts. He's been very kind," Willow agreed. "More than kind, I think," Mrs. Ramirez said shrewdly. "The way he looks at you, he cares for you, my hija." Willow felt her cheeks warm. "He feels responsible for me, that's all, because of what happened to his sister." Mrs. Ramirez waved a dismissive hand. "Responsibility, Pa, I have known Xander Fitzgerald for 5 years. Never has he brought a woman to meet me, never has he looked at one the way he looks at you." Before Willow could formulate a response, Mrs. Ramirez changed the subject, turning to practical matters of childbirth and infant care. For the next hour, she provided Willow with invaluable advice and reassurance, examining her briefly to confirm that the pregnancy appeared to be progressing normally. "You will send for me when the time comes," Mrs. Ramirez instructed as they concluded their conversation. "Day or night, it does not matter. Mr. Fitzgerald knows where to find me." "Thank you," Willow said sincerely, clasping the older woman's weathered hand. "I feel much better knowing you'll be there." "It is my calling," Mrs. Ramirez replied simply. "God gave me these hands to bring new life into the world. I have delivered more than 500 babies in my lifetime, and God willing, I will deliver many more." When they rejoined the men outside, Xander was deep in conversation with Mr. Ramirez about a horse the older man was training. He looked up when Willow appeared, his expression immediately concerned. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly as they took their leave. "Yes, perfect," Willow assured him. "Mrs. Ramirez is wonderful. I feel much better about everything." Relief washed across Xander's features. "I'm glad." "She delivered both the Vasquez brothers and half the children in the county. There's no one I'd trust more." They spent the next few hours completing their shopping, purchasing supplies for the ranch and a few personal items for Willow, including more fabric for sewing baby clothes. Xander insisted on buying her a shawl of soft blue wool when he noticed her admiring it in the mercantile. "Winter's coming," he said gruffly when she protested the expense. "Can't have you catching cold." Their final stop was at the Gonzales Hotel dining room for a late midday meal. The food was good, though Willow privately thought her own cooking had improved enough to rival it. As they ate, she noticed a well-dressed woman at a nearby table staring at them with undisguised disapproval. "Don't mind Mrs. Holcomb," Xander murmured, following Willow's gaze. "She considers herself the guardian of Gonzales morality." As if on cue, the woman rose from her table and approached them, her silk dress rustling importantly. "Mr. Fitzgerald," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How nice to see you in town and with company." Xander stood, his manners impeccable despite his obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Holcomb, may I present Miss Willow O'Malley?" "Miss O'Malley, this is Mrs. Holcomb, wife of the bank president." Willow nodded politely, but Mrs. Holcomb barely acknowledged her, her gaze fixed disparagingly on Willow's pregnant belly. "I must say, Mr. Fitzgerald, there has been some talk about your arrangement with Miss O'Malley. People are concerned about the example it sets for the community." Xander's jaw tightened. "What arrangement would that be, Mrs. Holcomb?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "An unmarried woman in her condition living on your property, it's scandalous." "Miss O'Malley is my housekeeper," Xander replied evenly. "She resides in the foreman's cabin, not in my home." "There is nothing improper about our arrangement." "Perhaps not technically," Mrs. Holcomb sniffed. "But appearances matter, Mr. Fitzgerald, particularly for someone in your position as a respected rancher. And as for you, young woman," she turned to Willow, "I would think you'd have more shame than to parade your condition in public." Willow felt heat rise to her face, but before she could respond, Xander stepped forward, placing himself slightly between her and Mrs. Holcomb. "That's quite enough," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss O'Malley has done nothing to be ashamed of. She's a fine, hard-working woman who has faced difficulties with more courage and dignity than many who have had far easier paths. I won't have her insulted, not by you or anyone else." Mrs. Holcomb's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Well, I never good day, Mrs. Holcomb," Xander said firmly, effectively dismissing her. The woman turned on her heel and stalked away, muttering under her breath about declining standards of decency. Xander sat back down, his face flushed with anger. "I apologize for that," he said to Willow. "Mrs. Holcomb has always been a busybody, but that was beyond the pale." "It's all right," Willow said softly, touched by his defense of her. "I knew there would be talk. It was naive to think otherwise." Xander shook his head. "It's not all right. You deserve better than to be treated like that." He paused, then added more quietly, "What she said about me being respected in the community that matters far less to me than doing what's right. Never doubt that, Willow." The use of her first name, spoken with such intensity, sent a shiver through her. In that moment, looking into his earnest hazel eyes, Willow felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection, a recognition of something neither had yet put into words. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than their journey into town, both lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Willow found herself stealing glances at Xander's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated on the road, the way the fading light caught in his hair, these details had become precious to her in ways she had not anticipated. When they reached the cabin, Xander helped her down from the wagon with the same care he always showed. But this time, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when she looked up at him, the expression in his eyes made her heart flutter. "Thank you for today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Xander nodded, seemingly unable to find words. He helped her carry the packages inside, then stood awkwardly in the doorway of the cabin. "I should see to the horses," he said finally. "Will you be all right on your own tonight?" "Of course," Willow replied. "I've got plenty to keep me busy." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded again and turned to go. Willow watched him walk away, a curious mixture of emotions swirling within her. Something had changed today, something important. But what it meant for their future, she couldn't yet say. As November deepened toward winter, the weather turned colder. Frost painted the prairie grass silver in the mornings, and the creek that ran through the ranch property developed thin sheets of ice along its edges. Inside the cabin, Willow kept the fire burning and the stove hot, creating a cozy haven against the encroaching chill. Her pregnancy had advanced to the point where certain tasks were becoming difficult. Bending to tend the fire or reaching high shelves left her breathless and uncomfortable. Without being asked, Xander began to stop by more frequently to help with the heavier chores, bringing in firewood, fetching water from the pump, moving furniture so she could clean beneath it. These increased visits led to longer conversations, deeper connections. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, talking about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they still harbored. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, Willow sewing baby clothes while Xander whittled or cleaned his tack. One evening in late November, as a rare Texas snowfall dusted the landscape outside, Xander arrived at the cabin looking troubled. "Is something wrong?" Willow asked as she took his coat and hung it by the door. Xander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of anxiety. "I received a letter today from Herbert Thompson." Willow felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. "Herbert, how? Why would he write to you?" "Apparently, he's had second thoughts," Xander said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He's inquiring about your whereabouts, says he wants to make amends and fulfill his obligations to you and the child." Willow sank into the rocking chair, her hands protectively covering her belly. "After all this time, after what he did?" She shook her head in disbelief. "How did he even know where to find me?" "The letter was forwarded from Mrs. Thornton at the hotel," Xander explained. "It seems he returned to Gonzales looking for you and was told you were staying at my ranch." A cold dread settled in Willow's stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," Xander replied, sitting down across from her. "I wanted to speak with you first. This concerns you and your child more than anyone." Willow stared into the fire, her mind racing. After months of abandonment, Herbert suddenly wanted to claim her and the baby. It made no sense, unless— "Did he mention anything about his current circumstances?" she asked. Xander's expression darkened. "Only that he's recently come into a favorable situation that would allow him to provide for you properly." "He's come into money," Willow said flatly. "That's the only reason he's suddenly remembered his obligations." She looked up at Xander, her eyes clear and determined. "I don't want to see him. I don't want anything from him." "Are you certain?" Xander asked carefully. "He is the father of your child. Legally, he has rights." "Rights?" Willow's voice rose slightly. "What rights does a man have who abandons a woman carrying his child? Who leaves her alone in a strange town with no money and no prospects? Who only returns when it's convenient for him?" She shook her head firmly. "No, Herbert Thompson forfeited any claim to this baby when he left me at that depot." Xander studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll write to him tomorrow, informing him that you wish to have no contact with him. But Willow, he might not accept that answer. He might come here." "Then I'll tell him myself," she said with a certainty that surprised even her. "I'm not the same desperate woman who stepped off that train 4 months ago, Xander. I'm stronger now. I know what I want." "And what is that?" Xander asked softly. "What do you want, Willow?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Willow's heart pounded as she considered her answer. In the firelight, Xander's face was half in shadow, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He had never looked more handsome to her nor more dear. "I want peace," she said finally. "Safety for my child, a life of dignity and purpose." She paused, gathering her courage. "And I want a sharp pain cut through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and double over." Xander was at her side in an instant, his face tight with concern. "Willow, what is it? Is it the baby?" she nodded, breathing through the pain as Mrs. Ramirez had taught her. I think it might be time, but it's too early. The baby's not due for another month." Fear flashed across Xander's features, quickly replaced by determination. "I'll ride for Mrs. Ramirez immediately. Will you be all right until we return?" Willow nodded again, though uncertainty gripped her. What if something was wrong? What if the baby came before Mrs. Ramirez could arrive? As if reading her thoughts, Xander squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'll be as quick as I can. Try to rest. Everything will be all right." He helped her to the bed, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. Before leaving, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, the first such intimate gesture between them. "Hold on, Willow," he whispered. "Just hold on." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. Willow heard the sound of hoofbeats as he galloped away, racing against time and the gathering snowfall to bring help. Alone in the cabin, with only the crackling fire and the howling wind for company, Willow closed her eyes and prayed for herself, for her unborn child, and for the man who had become more important to her than she had ever imagined possible. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear. Contractions came in waves, increasing in frequency and intensity as the night wore on. Willow paced the cabin when she could, trying to remember Mrs. Ramirez's advice about staying upright and moving to help the baby descend. When the pains became too strong to walk through, she leaned against the wall or furniture, breathing deeply and trying to remain calm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, accumulating on the ground and muffling all sounds except the wind. Willow found herself glancing repeatedly at the window, straining to hear hoofbeats that would signal Xander's return with Mrs. Ramirez. But as time passed with no sign of them, worry began to gnaw at her. What if the snowstorm had forced them to turn back? What if they had lost their way in the darkness and swirling snow? A particularly strong contraction gripped her, forcing a cry from her lips. When it passed, leaving her gasping and trembling, Willow made a decision. If help wasn't coming, she would have to prepare as best she could on her own. With shaking hands, she gathered clean towels and linens, placing them near the bed. She put water on to boil, remembering Mrs. Ramirez's emphasis on cleanliness. She found a small knife and sterilized it in the flames of the fire, in case she needed to cut the cord herself. Each task was accomplished between contractions, her movements becoming slower and more labored as her body prepared to bring new life into the world. Just as she was beginning to believe she would face this ordeal alone, the cabin door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and two snow-covered figures. Xander stamped his boots, helping Mrs. Ramirez remove her heavy cloak. "Willow," he called out, his voice tight with worry. "Where are you?" "Here," she replied weakly from where she had sunk to her knees beside the bed. In the grip of another contraction, Xander rushed to her side, lifting her gently onto the bed. His face was raw from the cold, his hair and beard crusted with melting snow, but his eyes were warm with concern. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said, clasping her hand. "The snow, the trails were nearly invisible, Mrs." Ramirez was already rolling up her sleeves, directing Xander to bring more water and light additional lamps. "How far apart are the pains, my hija?" she asked Willow, her capable hands checking the position of the baby through Willow's abdomen. "A few minutes, I think," Willow replied, trying to focus through the fog of pain. "They're very strong now." Mrs. Ramirez nodded, her expression serious but not alarmed. "The baby comes early, yes, but not too early, I think. You are fully prepared, I see." She gestured to the supplies Willow had gathered. "You will make a good mother. You think clearly even in pain." Xander hovered nearby, clearly uncertain of his role. "Should I go? This isn't. It's not proper for me to be here." "Proper," Mrs. Ramirez scoffed. "A woman is bringing life into the world. There is nothing more proper than that. But yes, for now, you wait outside. I will call if we need you." Xander nodded, but before leaving, he leaned close to Willow. "You are the bravest person I know," he whispered. "I'll be just outside if you need anything." The next hours were the most challenging of Willow's life. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, tearing through her body in relentless waves. Mrs. Ramirez was a calm, reassuring presence, guiding her through each contraction, encouraging her when her strength seemed to fail. "Push now, my hija," the midwife urged as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. "Your baby is eager to meet you." With a final, tremendous effort, Willow pushed, feeling the incredible pressure give way as her child slipped into the world and let out a lusty cry. Tears streamed down her face as Mrs. Ramirez placed a tiny, squirming bundle on her chest. "A boy," the midwife announced, smiling broadly. A strong, healthy boy, despite his early arrival. Willow gazed down at her son in wonder. His face was red and wrinkled, his head covered in damp dark hair. His tiny hands were balled into fists that waved in the air as he continued to cry, announcing his presence to the world with impressive volume. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his cheek gently. "I've been waiting to meet you," as Mrs. Ramirez efficiently dealt with the afterbirth and cleaned up. Willow couldn't take her eyes off her son. For all the hardship and heartbreak that had led to this moment, she couldn't regret any of it, not when it had resulted in this perfect, miraculous little person. "May I tell Mr. Fitzgerald he can come in now?" Mrs. Ramirez asked once Willow was settled comfortably with clean blankets, and the baby was swaddled against her chest. Willow nodded, suddenly nervous about Xander seeing her in such a state. But her worries vanished when he entered the room, his face lighting up at the sight of her and the baby. "You did it," he said softly, approaching the bed with reverence. "Willow, he's beautiful. Would you like to hold him?" She offered, surprised at how natural it felt to share this moment with him. Xander looked momentarily terrified, then nodded. With careful movements, Willow transferred the tiny bundle into his strong arms. The contrast was striking, this large, capable man cradling a newborn with such gentle tenderness. "Hello there, young man," Xander murmured, a finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "You've given us quite a night, haven't you?" Mrs. Ramirez watched the scene with knowing eyes. "I will make some tea," she announced, discreetly leaving the room to give them a moment of privacy. "Have you thought of a name?" Xander asked, still gazing at the baby in fascination. Willow hesitated. She had considered various names over the past months but had never settled on one. Now, looking at the small face that already seemed to hold hints of character and determination, she knew. "Samuel," she said decisively. "It means God has heard, and he did hear me, Xander. He brought us both safely through this night." "Samuel," Xander repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." He looked up, meeting Willow's eyes. And what of his surname? Will he be Samuel Thompson? The question was gently asked with no judgment in Xander's voice, but Willow felt its weight nonetheless. This was a decision that would affect her son's entire life. No, she said firmly. Herbert forfeited that right. He'll be Samuel O'Malley, at least for now. Something flickered in Xander's eyes, a question perhaps, or a hope, but he simply nodded and carefully returned baby Samuel to her arms. Mrs. Ramirez will stay with you today, he said. I've asked Hector and Miguel to take turns checking on you both when she leaves. I'd stay myself, but you have a ranch to run, Willow finished for him. I understand, Xander, you've already done more than enough. He shook his head. Not nearly enough. Then, with a gentle touch to Samuel's head and a long look at Willow that spoke volumes, he left the cabin. The days that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences as Willow adjusted to motherhood. Samuel proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping for reasonable stretches. Mrs. Ramirez visited daily for the first week, teaching Willow various techniques for soothing, bathing, and caring for her son. Xander, though clearly busy with ranch work made more difficult by the snow, found time to visit several times each day. He brought gifts, a beautifully carved wooden cradle he had been working on in secret, soft blankets purchased from town, a tiny pair of moccasins made by Mrs. Ramirez's sister. But more precious than these tangible items was his quiet support and evident delight in Samuel's every tiny achievement. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Samuel's birth, Xander arrived at the cabin looking unusually serious. He waited until Willow had settled Samuel in his cradle before speaking. Herbert Thompson is in town, he said without preamble. He's asking about you and the baby. Willow's heart raced, but not with the fear she might have expected. Instead, she felt a surge of protective anger. What does he want? He claims he wants to do right by you both, Xander replied, his tone making it clear how little he believed this. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that he's a changed man, that he's come back to marry you and claim his son. His son, Willow repeated incredulously. He hasn't earned the right to call Samuel his anything. Xander nodded in agreement. I told him as much, but he's insistent. He wants to see you. Willow paced the small confines of the cabin, thinking rapidly. Do you think he could legally take Samuel from me? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. Not if I have anything to say about it, Xander replied with quiet ferocity, then more calmly but legally. It's complicated. He is the natural father. If he were to press the issue in court, claiming you were unfit or unable to provide for the child, the implication hung in the air between them. Willow glanced at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in his cradle, unaware of the storm gathering around his tiny existence. I'll see him, she decided. Better to face him directly than to have him spreading stories in town or making legal threats. Will you be with me? Every step of the way, Xander promised. They arranged for Herbert to come to the ranch the following day. Mrs. Ramirez agreed to stay with Samuel in the main house while Willow and Xander met with Herbert in the cabin. That night, after putting Samuel down for the evening, Willow sat by the fire, her mind racing with all the things she wanted to say to Herbert. Anger, hurt, betrayal, these emotions had been her companions for months. But now, looking at her sleeping son, she found them being replaced by something else, gratitude. If Herbert hadn't abandoned her, she would never have met Xander. She would never have discovered her own strength and resilience. She would not be the woman she was now becoming. Herbert Thompson arrived at the ranch shortly after noon the next day, driving a rented buggy from town. From the window of the cabin, Willow watched his approach with Xander standing supportively by her side. Herbert looked much as she remembered a handsome man with carefully styled dark hair and fashionable clothes. But as he drew nearer, she noticed details she had missed or ignored during their brief courtship. The calculating look in his eyes, the affected way he carried himself, the hint of insincerity in his smile. "Are you ready for this?" Xander asked quietly. Willow nodded, squaring her shoulders. "More than ready." They waited as Herbert tied his horse and approached the cabin. Xander opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Thompson," he said coolly, "come in." Herbert entered, removing his hat and glancing around the modest cabin with barely concealed disdain before his eyes settled on Willow. His expression instantly shifted to one of practiced contrition. "Willow, my dear," he said, stepping toward her with arms outstretched. "How I've missed you." Willow remained where she was, making no move to embrace him. "Hello, Herbert. Please have a seat." Confusion flickered across his face at her formal tone, but he complied, taking a chair by the fire while Willow and Xander sat across from him. "I understand congratulations are in order," Herbert said, attempting to sound cheerful. "I'm told we have a son." "I have a son," Willow corrected him firmly. "His name is Samuel." Herbert's smile faltered. "Now, Willow, I know I've made mistakes, terrible, unforgivable mistakes. But I've come back to make things right. I want to marry you as I promised. I want to be a father to our child." "Why now?" Xander interjected, his voice hard. "You left her alone and pregnant. What's changed?" Herbert shot him an irritated glance. "I don't believe this is any of your concern, Mr. Fitzgerald. This is between Willow and me." "Xander has earned the right to be concerned," Willow said. "He's been there for me and for Samuel when you were nowhere to be found. So I'll ask you again, Herbert, why now?" Herbert sighed, affecting an expression of deep remorse. "I was a coward, Willow. I was afraid of the responsibility of being a husband and father when I barely knew how to take care of myself, but I've changed. My uncle died and left me his mercantile business in San Antonio. I'm a wealthy man now, able to provide a good life for you and the baby." The revelation confirmed Willow's suspicion. It wasn't concern for her or love for his child that had brought Herbert back. It was the security of his newfound wealth and the desire for a ready-made family to complete his image as a successful businessman. "I appreciate your honesty, Herbert," she said calmly. "But I'm afraid I must decline your proposal. I have no desire to marry you or to have you involved in Samuel's life." Herbert's facade of remorse vanished, replaced by indignation. "You can't be serious. He's my son. I have rights." "Rights?" Willow repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What rights did you claim when you left me at that depot with nothing but a hastily written note? What rights did you exercise during the months I carried your child alone? What rights did you assert when Samuel came into this world?" Herbert's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I made a mistake, yes, but I'm here now, offering you respectability, a comfortable home, financial security. What more could you want?" "Integrity," Willow replied simply. "Loyalty, love, things you've never shown me or our son." Herbert's gaze darted between Willow and Xander, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I see how it is," he said coldly. "You found yourself a replacement already. How convenient for you." Xander took a step forward, his expression dangerous, but Willow placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My relationship with Xander is not the issue here," she said firmly. "The issue is that you abandoned me and our unborn child. You forfeited any claim to him by your actions. I've built a life here, Herbert. A good life. Samuel and I don't need you." Herbert's eyes narrowed. "You may feel differently when I take this matter to court. No judge will award custody to an unmarried woman living in a cabin on another man's property over a father with means and standing in the community." "Is that a threat?" Xander asked quietly. "It's reality," Herbert replied, rising to his feet. "I'll give you time to reconsider, Willow. 1 week. After that, I'll be forced to pursue legal action to secure my rights as Samuel's father." With that, he placed his hat back on his head and strode out of the cabin, letting the door slam behind him. As the sound of his buggy faded into the distance, Willow sank back into her chair, the strength that had sustained her during the confrontation ebbing away. "He'll do it," she said, her voice hollow. "He'll try to take Samuel from me." Xander knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I won't let that happen, Willow, I promise you." She looked into his earnest face, wanting desperately to believe him. "How can you stop it?" Herbert has money influence. I'm just a fallen woman with no family, no standing. That's not who you are, Xander said fiercely. And there is a way to ensure Herbert can never take Samuel from you. He paused, drawing a deep breath as if gathering courage. Marry me. Willow stared at him, certain she had misheard. What, marry me? Xander repeated, his voice stronger now. As your husband, I could legally adopt Samuel. Herbert would have no claim on him then. You would do that, Willow whispered. Marry me just to protect Samuel. Xander's expression softened, and he reached up to touch her cheek gently. Not just to protect Samuel, though I'd do anything for that little boy. I want to marry you because I love you, Willow. I think I've loved you since that first night at the depot, when you looked at me with those brave, frightened eyes. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've made that cabin into a home, the way you sing to Samuel when you think no one is listening, the way you never gave up even when everything seemed darkest. Tears filled Willow's eyes as his words washed over her. Xander, you don't have to answer right away, he said quickly. And if your feelings aren't the same, we could still marry for Samuel's sake. I would never presume or expect anything from you that you weren't willing to give freely. Willow placed her hand over his where it rested on her cheek. How could I not love you? She asked softly. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me shelter when I had none, purpose when I was lost, hope when I had none. You've been more of a father to Samuel in 2 weeks than Herbert would be in a lifetime. Hope dawned in Xander's eyes. Is that a yes? Willow nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. Yes, Xander Fitzgerald, I will marry you. Not just for Samuel's protection, but because I love you with all my heart. Xander's face lit with such joy that Willow felt her breath catch. He leaned forward, hesitating just a moment before his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. It was their first kiss, but it felt like coming home, like the culmination of everything they had been moving toward since that fateful night at the Gonzales depot. When they finally broke apart, Xander rested his forehead against hers. We should do it soon, he said. Before Herbert can take any legal action. How soon? Willow asked. Tomorrow, if Reverend Davis is available, Xander replied. We can ride into town first thing in the morning. Willow laughed, the sound bright with happiness despite the circumstances that had precipitated their decision. Tomorrow, then, I'll wear my green dress. You could wear a potato sack and still be the most beautiful bride in Texas, Xander assured her, kissing her again. Later, after they had retrieved Samuel from the main house and Xander had reluctantly returned to his chores, Willow sat in the rocking chair with her son in her arms, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. What do you think of that, Samuel? She whispered to the drowsy infant. Tomorrow I'll be Mrs. Fitzgerald, and soon after, you'll be Samuel Fitzgerald too. Xander will be your father in every way that matters. Samuel blinked up at her with his deep blue eyes, his tiny hand curling around her finger. In that moment, all the pain and uncertainty of the past months seemed a small price to pay for the joy that now filled her heart. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect winter day in Central Texas. Willow dressed with care in her green dress, arranging her auburn hair in soft waves around her face. Samuel, fed and content, was bundled warmly in the cradle Xander had made for him. A knock at the cabin door announced Mrs. Ramirez's arrival. Xander had asked her to care for Samuel while they traveled to town for the ceremony. Ah, look at you, the older woman exclaimed, clasping her hands together. Such a beautiful bride. Mr. Fitzgerald is a fortunate man. I'm the fortunate one, Willow replied, hugging Mrs. Ramirez gratefully. Thank you for everything you've done for us. It is my pleasure, my Hija. Now let me see this little angel before you go. As Mrs. Ramirez cooed over Samuel, another knock sounded Xander, right on time. When Willow opened the door, her heart skipped at the sight of him. He was dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit she had never seen before, with a crisp white shirt and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed. But it was the look in his eyes when he saw her that took her breath away, a mixture of awe, tenderness, and unwavering love. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "So are you," she replied, and was rewarded with a boyish grin that made him look years younger. The ride to town was filled with a nervous excitement. They discussed practical matters where they would live after the wedding, the main house. They decided, with the cabin kept ready for when Xander hired a new foreman, how they would handle Herbert's inevitable reaction, plans for formally adopting Samuel once they were married. Reverend Davis was available and delighted to perform the ceremony. His wife and the church secretary served as witnesses. The service was brief but meaningful, with Willow and Xander exchanging vows in clear, certain voices. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xander's kiss was both tender and possessive, a declaration to the world that they belonged to each other now. They stopped at the county clerk's office to file the marriage certificate, ensuring that their union was legally recorded as quickly as possible. Then, with lighter hearts, they headed back to the ranch to Samuel, to their new shared life, to the home they would build together. Herbert Thompson appeared at the ranch 3 days later, his expression smug as he approached the cabin. Willow and Xander were waiting for him on the porch, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "I hope you've reconsidered my proposal," Herbert began without preamble. "I've spoken with a lawyer in San Antonio who assures me—" "I'm afraid you're too late, Mr. Thompson," Xander interrupted calmly. "Willow and I were married 3 days ago. The paperwork for my legal adoption of Samuel is already being processed." Herbert's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. You can't do this." "We already have," Willow replied, her voice steady. "Samuel is my son, and now he is legally Xander's as well. You have no claim to him." "This won't stand," Herbert sputtered. "I'll contest it." You'll do nothing," Xander said, stepping forward. "Unless you want the entire county to know how you abandoned a pregnant woman with a callous note and $23 to her name. I imagine that would damage your newly respectable reputation considerably." Herbert glared at them both, calculating his options. Finally, he turned on his heel without another word and stalked back to his buggy. "You think he'll cause more trouble?" Willow asked as they watched him drive away. Xander shook his head. "He's a coward at heart, always has been. He won't risk his precious reputation." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her and Samuel close. "Besides, we're a family now. We can face anything together." Family. The word echoed in Willow's heart as she leaned into her husband's embrace. From the moment she had stepped off that train in Gonzales, alone and afraid, to this moment of perfect belonging, it had been a journey of pain and joy, loss and discovery. But standing here with Xander and Samuel, she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her home. The years that followed were not without challenges. The drought of 1879 tested the resources of every rancher in the county. A lightning strike nearly burned down the barn in the summer of 1880. And when Willow discovered she was expecting again in the spring of 1881, complications during the pregnancy confined her to bed for nearly a month, with Xander frantic with worry beside her. But there were far more joys than sorrows. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed Xander everywhere, already showing an aptitude for horses that made his father burst with pride. Willow delivered a healthy daughter they named Elizabeth in the winter of 1881, with Mrs. Ramirez once again guiding the baby safely into the world. The Fitzgerald Ranch prospered under Xander's careful management, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. On a warm spring evening in 1888, Willow stood on the porch of their home, watching as Xander taught 7-year-old Samuel to throw a lariat. Elizabeth, now 6, sat nearby, carefully stitching a sampler under her mother's instruction. 2-year-old James toddled after a butterfly in the yard, his chubby legs working hard to keep up with the fluttering insect. "Mama, look," Samuel called out as his small loop settled around a fence post. "I did it." "Well done, Sam," Willow called back, her heart swelling at the pride on both her son's and husband's faces. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, Willow and Xander sat together on the porch swing, watching as twilight settled over the land they both loved. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him, a position as familiar and necessary as breathing after 10 years together. "Do you ever think about that day at the depot?" Xander asked quietly. "How different our lives might have been if I hadn't come by when I did." Willow smiled, taking his free hand and lacing their fingers together. "I used to think it was chance or luck. Now I know better. It was providence, Xander. We were always meant to find each other." Xander lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I thank God every day that I stepped forward that evening. Best decision I ever made." "And I thank God that you said those words. You're not alone," Willow replied softly, "because from that moment on I never was again." As darkness fell over the Fitzgerald ranch and the first stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened, abandoned bride at a dusty depot to a woman surrounded by love and purpose, it was more than she had ever dared to dream. And it had all begun with a moment of kindness, with a stranger's steady voice saying the words her heart had most needed to hear. "You're not alone." In that simple truth, she had found her greatest blessing. And in the years that followed, through all of life's joys and sorrows, it remained the foundation upon which she and Xander built their life together, a life rich with love, family, and the knowledge that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them as they had from the beginning, together.